Hello, welcome to Nondual Christianity. This video I want to talk about how do we get blessed by God. And I want to do this by looking at the beatitudes in both Matthew and Luke. My basic premise or thing I'm wondering about is if, regardless of other things those passages are trying to communicate, one thing they're trying to communicate is that you are blessed, we are all blessed, in the midst of whatever external circumstance we find ourselves in. So we don't need to wonder, am I blessed? We don't need to wonder, how do I get blessed by God? Because I'm not. The question is more along the lines of, how do I recognize the blessing that's already present? Am I open to the blessing that's already present? Because if we start from a place of blessedness, of fullness, then the external circumstances don't matter as much because we're not trying to get anything from them. So let me explain a little bit of why I say that. When we look at these passages, we see this contrast between, blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Or perhaps a little bit easier is, blessed are you who weep, now for you shall laugh. Or woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. We get these contrasts between current state, future state. And growing up, these were always taken in a very dual ego mind sort of perspective, and I think it leads to some inconsistencies or some contradictions which are difficult to overcome. So the first one is, what's the end game here? Is the end goal to laugh or to weep? Because the way that these seem to work is, it's saying, woe to you who laugh now because you'll weep later. Blessed are you if you weep now because you'll laugh later. And we can very quickly idealize maybe the opposite side of things. So we could very quickly idealize perhaps weeping as the ultimate goal, or mourning as the ultimate goal, and sort of try to relish in enjoyment from that. Or the other thing that I've seen people fall into is taking a strong line between the now and the later. So sure, the goal is to laugh. Sure, the goal is to be full. Sure, the goal is to, all these things we consider good. But the problem is that because of however the world is broken, whatever problems there are, see my video on problems exist, which is not true, right? There's no problems. Then what we need to do is make sure that we're suffering now, because that's a guarantee that later we will not be. And it sets up this dichotomy between heaven later, which is a very typical Christian belief, and that's strongly contrasted with the now. But I'm not so sure that either of those are really what the point is. I do think there's a lot of wisdom in being aware and making use of the lack in our external circumstances, absolutely, as a path of growth and awakening. But we would typically consider, and I would say this audience here would consider, people who were full, people who were rich, people who laughed, people who had power, people who didn't have to necessarily make peace because they could take what they wanted, right? Those people are blessed. That's kind of what most of us are going for, right? You don't really have to convince too many people that a millionaire is blessed. We naturally assume that that's the case. We naturally assume that when the external circumstances are what we would consider favorable, the person is blessed. So maybe what Jesus is trying to do here is to tell people that they are also blessed. So the Old Testament makes a link even between righteousness and blessing from God, wealth. So if you don't have wealth, you could very easily feel like not only do you not have the blessing of the wealth, but God might be against you as well. And what if what Jesus is trying to communicate is, no, we naturally assume we're blessed if things are going our way. And if things are not going your way, if you feel a lack, you are also blessed. And because you're blessed in both states, I come back to, it doesn't matter what the external circumstances are. It's not a question of blessedness from God. And perhaps then also what Jesus is trying to point to is not to pay as much attention to the external, but to turn in and to experience that blessing, the blessedness, internally. Because if we are the divine nature, then that joy, that peace, that whatever we most seek, whatever we want most, is already present. And it's a matter of simply tapping into that and becoming aware of where and how are we experiencing that within ourselves. What I find is it takes me a little bit to get silent, but then I just feel this sense of aliveness. And when I am in that state of just feeling alive and the joy of simply feeling alive, it doesn't really matter what's happening. And I wonder if that's part of what Jesus is pointing to here, is you're blessed regardless of your external circumstances. So look inside, feel the blessing and the blessedness that is you, that is your true nature. So just some thoughts. I know that's fairly contrary to the way I grew up hearing these. So if you have some discussion points or things you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Thank you for exploring this with me today.